Hello everyone and welcome back to my shop. First off, I want to apologize for the audio quality. I've had to redub this due to when I originally did this service, I had some music playing in the background, and well, that's a no-no, so I'm having to redub it. But anyway, this is a Kubota BX23D. It's a 2004 model, and I have it in here for its 900-hour service. And while I have it in here for the service, I'm going to address a couple of new leaks that's cropped up on that front axle. Now, they aren't major at this particular time, but as Barney says, let's nip it in the bud while I have it down, and I'll get it repaired at this time also. This was done about back in 2018, the summer. So, like I say, just bear with me, and we're going to get to it. And I'm going to start by pointing out the leaking front end. That knuckle right there is the leak on the right side that I'm going to address, and down here that is the pivot shaft, and right behind that castle nut, and it's got a slight leak there. In order to repair that, I've got to drop the axle, so I'll be getting to that point shortly. Alright, here's the parts I'm going to use for the repair. I've got them lined up on the bench. This is the steering knuckle seal. It's a two-piece seal. It's got like a sleeve and a seal part to it. See the part number there. This is a split plastic split ring that actually holds back an O-ring. And this is the O-ring. Both of them install inside the front axle at the pivot point, and the pivot shaft actually extends through them. This is the bushing. There's two, one at the front part of the axle and the other on the back side, that the pivot shaft also inserts through. This is the pivot shaft. I didn't measure the old one yet to see if it was worn, but I decided I'll go ahead and swap it anyway while I had it down. And that's all for the leaking front axle parts. This is the valve cover gasket or O-ring. I'm going to check the valve clearance while I've got it down, so I'll replace that gasket. This is the parking brake pedal anti-rattle spring. It basically holds the pedal tight when it's not engaged so it doesn't rattle, and of course mine's been rattling now, so I'm going to replace that spring while I have it down. And here are the 900-hour service parts. Here's the engine oil filter. Here's the hydraulic fluid filter that installs on the HST, or the hydrostatic transmission. It's replaced every 300 hours. There's another part number. Here's the air cleaner, the engine air cleaner. And it's replaced every 100 hours along with the oil and oil filter. That's the scheduled maintenance. Here's the hydraulic fluid for the tractor. Now this is a Super UDT2, which is a synthetic multi-grade hydraulic oil. It takes about 2.5 gallons to do the service. I've got an extra quart there for just in case. This is the 8090 that'll be going back in the front axle once I put it back together. And this is the engine oil, 10W30, diesel rated, C rated for, of course, the engine. I've had real good luck out of that Rutella oil. That's good stuff. And that's all my parts lined up there. I'm going to guesstimate I've probably got around $200 worth of parts sitting there waiting to get installed into the tractor and also to perform the service. Here's a shot of the tractor. Now, Kubota calls that the bonnet. That's the cowling that wraps around the side. It's one piece. It slides off from the front. I'm going to remove that to do the service. It's not necessary to, but I'm going to. Here's a shot where the oil drain plug is on the oil pan. I guess I could have put a light down there to illuminate it better, but you can't miss it once you get under there. Notice you don't have to jack the tractor up to do this service. It sits high enough, even though as a BX model tractor, it is pretty low. There's 4 bolts that actually holds that bonnet on, and if you notice, the engine's actually reversed. That's the radiator there, but I'm pointing at the 2 bolts that's on the rear part of the bonnet, and there's 2 up here in the front that are nuts. Now, the hood does not have to come off, but the front grill guard does. So I reverse those 4 bolts down there. They're Allen heads on the other side, and that way I can put an impact, I think it's a 3/4 inch socket on it to zip it off real quick. Alright, now we're down underneath the tractor, and I'm going to point out a few things while we're down here. First thing, that's the hydrostatic filter right there, and up there that is the cooling fan for the hydrostat and the hydrostatic transmission. Now that fan, that little bar there, is the only protection it generally has from the factory, which is not good enough. Normally, the deck, the mid-mount mower, protects that fan, but when you have that mower off, you need something else, and I've made up a skid plate that'll work and cover it. It works off the same lift arms, but replacing that fan is not very hard on this model of Kubota, but the later models, the newer ones, they say you even have to shift the whole engine forward some in order to do it. Now, that's not really that hard to do if you've got any mechanical. But anyway, that right there, this is the first fuel filter in the system. The tank's back there. Now this is the electric fuel pump right there. Okay, so you've got a filter, you've got the tank, filter, and then the electric fuel pump. The line runs up into the engine compartment, and that's where the filter number 2. So there's actually 2 fuel filters on this. They're supposed to get changed every 300 to 400 hours, and I do them every 300 hours. So I'll be replacing them. I don't show it, but I'll be replacing them with them under there. Now that's the lift arms for the big mount mower, and this is the front, the U-joints for the front drive shaft. Now they are not greasable, believe it or not. They're permanently lubed. So if they get loose or anything, well, you just have to replace it. That is the fuel filter in the engine compartment. The second one is before the fuel injection pump, and that's where your air filter goes, right there in that housing. Okay, now that's the oil filter. So you can get to it without removing the bonnet, but like I say, if to do a good inspection of the hoses and the belt and all that other stuff, it's good to remove that bonnet. So removing the oil filter, like I say, you don't have to remove the bonnet to get to it. Those 3 lines there are the hydraulic lines going up to the front end loader control. Alright, there's a shot with the bonnet removed. Alright, now we're under the tractor to do the hydrostat change. The engine oil has been changed, and I just wanted to show a few things before I do it. This, where my finger's pointing, is where the drain is for the hydrostatic transmission. Now keep in mind, there's nearly 3 gallons in there. 2 3/4 gallons of fluid, and my containers don't. So you need to make sure you have enough containers to catch it, or you'll have to plug it when you fill the first one up to get it dumped so you can get some more. So anyway, we're going to start draining it now. I wanted to point out that drain plug for the hydrostatic transmission is a number 17 or 17 millimeter wrench. So that's what I used. Now it's almost completely drained. Now I'm going to go ahead and swap out the hydraulic filter. What I'm going to use to do that is my handy large channel locks. They make several types of filter wrenches, and I have actually a claw type if in the case where I can't get those in it, but 99% of the time I'll use them. So anyway, alright, we're underneath the tractor, and that is the hydrostatic filter right here.
And just so happens that my drain pan, which took 3 trips, well, I had another one I could slide in, so between it and the other one there was 3 trips to get it drained. But the drain pan, it's still dripping back there. You may still see it. I lowered the 3-point hitch to get all the fluid I can out of that. Now I'm going to take the wrench and take this off. I'm going to have to do that off camera. Just want to point out, if you're doing your first filter change on one of these, Kubota must use a gorilla to put them filters on. They get really hard to get off, and that's normal. So if you run into it to get it off, that's normal. So this is the 3rd filter I'll be putting on this in 900 hours. No, I did it 50, 360. This is actually the 4th filter, and it's not as hard after that. So anyway, here we go. Okay, I didn't show me doing it, but the strainer for the hydrostatic transmission, well, the whole hydraulic system, is right here. See that big nut right here? You back that out, and and you can leave the wheel on because the strainer will come out. And sometimes at the 50-hour mark, I had some debris in it from break-in. After that, other than that, when I've pulled it at every 300-hour interval, I've not got anything in the screen. So, but it's always good to check it while you got the fluid empty and before you add the fluid back. So anyway, that's your strainer. Alright, in order to remove the steering cylinder, these 2 bolts, one there and one there, and holds the clamp that clamps the steering cylinder to the front axle, and there's 2 on the other side. You remove those 2 and you can actually swing the entire steering cylinder out of the way, and you don't have to disconnect the steering lines. Kubota's manual indicates to remove those lines, and I didn't find that necessary. Alright, we've got the axle out. We'll take a look here, and you can see in there pretty good. But let's see if we can get a light going. You can see the white plastic washer, and you can see the rubber O-ring. This is in the front of the axle right here. They look in really good shape, to be totally truthful with you. Alright, and we'll go back here to the back side, and you can see the same thing. There's the washer. That looks in good shape, as does the O-ring. So I got to thinking, well, maybe the problem with the pivot axle bolt leaking was just because it was loose. So I went over here, and I've got the old bolt right here laid up next to a brand new one. Now you can see here's a slight little war spot on where the bushing, where it rides in the bushing, and here's the other one. So we come down here with my, it's not that much of a precision micrometer, but it'll do. And let's go down here where it's wore, and we'll you can see it's coming in at about a 19.6, and we're about the same distance. 19.6. So we'll come up here to the front on where the bushing rides, and we'll go down a little. And we're looking at about a 19.5. We'll close it about the same distance. 19.6. So it looks like there is a little bit of wear on this shaft on the front part of the pivot. So But is that enough to cause a problem? Don't know. Now the workshop manual called for dropping the steering cylinder with it. I decided instead of breaking the lines loose that I could work around it with my jack, and I did. Putting it back together may be fun, but I decided to leave it like that. I might have to go get a boot for this tie rod end, I noticed. And I may wait and do the knuckles back when I get the axle back in. So at this point, that's where we're at. Also, we go back here and get the bushings. And it's not as tight a fit as I would think, but it may close up some once it gets in, gets seated in the axle. But there is, well, you can't tell there, well, you may can see it. There is a line there, okay. Anyway, that's where we're at so far. Again, here is that plastic washer. And I was expecting to find it wasted, and I'm really surprised to find it in really good shape. So I could probably put that thing back in the way it is, but since I've got it out, I'm going to go ahead and replace the bushings and the seals. Alright, we finally got the actual shaft, the pivot pin seals and bushings replaced. Now, replacing them bushings is a very intense job. Now, I had to make this tool here, this chisel, to be able to go in. There's a slot that's in the bushing, the old bushing, and what you have to do is drive through it, spread it, and then lift an edge, and then continue lifting it, and then you can work it out. That's the only way I know how to do it. I got about 3 hours in it, and like I say, it's not for the faint of heart. Can be done with a chisel, hammer, pair of channel locks to pull it out. So, and to test fit your pin, here's the new pin. You should put it in from the rear, and you can feel the drag, how tight it is going through those rubber O-rings, and then there it is. There's no sidewards play at all in that. Matter of fact, there's very little play each way, so you can see how it seals up very well. And actually, that axle pivot holes, the carrier there, is above the actual fluid level of the there's some fluid that gets it. The normal level is below that. It's only when it pressurizes after it runs that it actually gets up in there and lubricates. So anyway, have to tap it some to get it out. It's that tight of a fit. So anyway, we got that done. I will concentrate on these other seals later. So stay tuned. Alright, now we're tackling the steering knuckles seals, and I've got this one broke loose. That's the inside of it. Now, you can't tell, but there's a C-clamp right here, and you take your snap ring pliers, I guess snap ring, I'm sorry, and take your snap ring pliers and take that off, and that'll allow this whole knuckle to drop. That's the only thing keeping that on there is that snap ring. When you have it down, it's good to check out your gears to make sure they're good and clear. And here's the wheel driving gear. Got a good bearing there, and that one's really smooth. All the gears look good. The seal has never leaked there, so I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to get in there and replace that seal. Anyway, That's where we're at right now. And there's two lands that'll allow you to pry it off, because they use a good sealer on these. Here's one land and one on the other. You have to, I wouldn't recommend driving a screwdriver in there to separate them. And between the finished surfaces, those two lands on the other side is where you need to work back and forth. And once it breaks the seal, you're good to go. Alright, I finally got the knuckle off. That snap ring down in there, you see it on top of the gear, that was a pain. But finally got it out. The gear looks good. The housing, everything looks good. There is a very wet and leaky seal right there. So I'll be removing that. And this is actually a two-piece seal. And there's like a race up here at the very top. I'm going to have to pry that off from the top of the spindle there. And to give you an idea of the bearing, here it is, a two-piece. There's the new piece that slides up there. And there's the seal that actually goes down in the steering knuckle. So that's where we're at. Alright, I got the new race drove back on there after prying the old one off. I used a slick trick that I seen on the internet on YouTube. Here's the old race that actually fit up like that, and what I did was I turned it around like this, then I used the PTO cover to drive it on like that. Worked pretty good. Didn't hurt the PTO cover at all. Multi-purpose tool. So unless you got a socket or a driver that'll fit over this large spindle section here, then there you go. That and the old race. The new seal that fits in the knuckle slides up and actually rides right up in there. There you go. Alright, on to pulling the seal on the knuckle. Alright, I've got the old seal out, and before I seal it up, it's a good idea to check your bearings and make sure that they are smooth, you don't see any damage. There's two bearings on this knuckle, which Kubota really built a pretty stout steering mechanism here. And turn all your gears, make sure everything is smooth. I reached down in there and I got it smooth, so it's all good. And that's before you put your new seal on. Alright, there's the axle reinstalled. You can see the castle nut is torqued back down. I believe it was 11 foot-pounds, 11 or 13. I'll look that up. And you can see a cotter pin. Now, I recommend to check that every 100 hours whenever you do the engine service, because it can get loose because there's a lot of stress put on that axle, and that's what wears those bushings and seals out. I've had about 100 hours on this since I've done this service, and it's dry as a bone, so there you go. All right. Kubota kind of hides the hydrostat fluid level dipstick and the fill kind of in the back. You've got to remove. So here's the dipstick right here. All right, you got to work around that loop tube. That's for the backhoe. This particular model does adapt to a backhoe. And there's the fill right back there. So you have to remove this the top link for the 3-point hitch in order to get a funnel down in there to fill it. It's kind of a pain, but it it doesn't use any, so I only have to actually access it every 300 hours when I do the hydrostat fluid change. So when I originally recorded that 900-hour service, and I did that front axle work. The front axle with those new seals is held good. So I expect another 900, 800 to 1,000 hours before I have to worry about any seals again. I think the main problem is when you get a lot of dirt and crud down around those knuckles, those steering knuckles, especially if you're doing a lot of dirt work. Perhaps if I kept it cleaner around those knuckles, the dirt couldn't have got in there and wore that seal out. And also, if I had kept that castle nut tightened more regular, I could have avoided having to replace those seals. But anyway, that's really the only major service repair I've ever had to do to this tractor. It's a real good tractor. I've had some flat tires, and I just plug them. But other than that, I can't complain. The oil gets changed oil filter and air filter gets changed every 100 hours, and every 300 hours is when the hydrostat fluid and filter should be changed. And the fuel filters, I think the book calls for 400 or 500 hours, but I do it every 300 hours when I do the hydrostat. So anyway, and where am I at now? I'm about at 1,077 hours. So it's getting due to getting close to the 1,100 hour service done, which will be oil and filter. So anyway, that's my little Kubota that I do everything from mowing to front end loader work to backhoe work with. And gardening. I run a tiller, cultivators. It's a pretty good little tractor.